think it's loud all the time. It doesn't matter. We're in the roastery. It's loud. We're going to do a lot of background noise removal on this one.
This is what technology...
Michael Weiser. This is how we do it. Run that AI algorithm.
Hey, you know what? Our office is in flux. It's not going to be too bad unless they're filling the machine. So every 15 minutes or so, you may hear a blast.
Oh, man, we picked the wrong spot to sit, huh?
Well,
here, let's just scoot over a couple feet.
We can slide over. We can slide over.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's kind of why we came here, is we thought, nobody's here.
Nobody's here.
It's Monday. Nobody's coming.
It's Monday. No one's coming to work.
No one's coming in.
We've created a culture where no one comes to work. Man, I'm so slow this morning, dude. That's ridiculous.
All right, man. I don't think I'm necessarily fast this morning either. It's like Monday. We're waking up. I feel like there's in my work right now, I've got many different threads that are like none of them in and of themselves overwhelming, but many different like threads of thought and work that are to be either overseen or engaged with. And so for me, I kind of feel that way too, where I kind of just want to sit there and drink my coffee and think about all the stuff and like slowly meander on plans towards the things today. That's the vibe I got.
Do you feel like you have too many threads or the right amount of threads?
I don't know if it's too many threads. No, it's the right amount. They're just complex. Like, it's not like, no, I would say it's not too much. I think what it is I have what we talked about before. You have like this big end goal, and you have all the things in between, and then we are in process of calibrating the step-by-step order of attack via three plus different humans, right? Between, at least in this one portion, more when they talk about retail, but Dulce, Mark, and Andre. But when you say that, you're talking about wholesale and coffee quality. You're talking about green department. You're talking about roasting, just interweaving different threads together, and that's chill. And then we are working on a transition in purveyors as well, and so there's just like plans going on with that and communication then include retail and wholesale.
Yeah,
in terms of Mark and Herman communicating that direction, and it's just everybody does a great job, but kind of my overarching gig is to know what's going on and to make sure that we don't miss anything, right, and to make sure that we're still moving forward.
Yeah, I threw my 2 cents in on some QC stuff the other week. Some espresso tasting was happening, and Mark was at the helm. He was pulling shots of a different version of the answer, not the one that's in the cafes, but it's the one after.
Yeah, the one we're playing with.
And I had just had one in the cafe that was really, really good. And this one was less good for a bunch of different reasons.
Yep.
But it had more hollow acidity. And when I say that, what I mean is, when I say hollow, I mean there's a presence of acidity there, but it's not tied to any particular flavor. So it's just this kind of generic brightness where I couldn't say that this is papaya or some sort of tropical fruit or, berries or whatever. It's just kind of
zippy.
It's just kind of there. Yeah. And that's not super appealing to me.
Nah. Especially in that coffee.
And the body wasn't as good. But there's just so many things going on. And it felt like we were trying to compare apples to oranges. And I was like, okay, we're comparing this shot on this machine with this water of this many days out to like the machine next door, which has different water, different age, different barista. We don't know. I was like, you guys need 2 grinders in here. Like, you need 2 grinders. You need both versions of the roast on the same date. And you need to, this is what I would do.
Yeah, no.
Mark the grinder on the bottom. Have someone fill up the grinders and mark them on the bottom and shuffle them around.
Right.
And you've got 2 versions of the answer that you have.
Just making coffee.
You're making coffee, same machine, same water, same barista, controlling for as many variables as possible. And then because you don't know which one you're pulling, you have no ego involved in which one's better or which one's worse. So you have to let your taste buds be your guide and say, yep, I like this one better, and this is why, and then being open to be surprised. Because tasting something and
like
thinking
in the bubble.
Tasting something in a bubble or without a reference point, because we taste so much with reference points. You're trying to think like, is this better than the other one? It might be better than that one shot I got of the other one, or it might be better or worse than that one shot, but overall, And then I was, I'm the most annoying ever, because I'm like, So what happens with this? You know, what? Well, we're tasting coffee. Like, where's Jared?
Oh yeah, I was out. I had to force him. Yeah,
Right, and it's just
but that's a great question because that's kind of the whole point. You don't want the people who are involved in the process just to be waiting on what maybe I have to say per se.
But if your opinion is one that's going to tip the
sure.
scales on what we're doing, then it's like,
Yeah,
yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
do want
Totally.
to wait, or I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
wasn't doing anything wrong. He was
No,
just
no.
playing around.
No,
but
I
he was
agree on
definitely
that.
tasting intently.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
But that's great because then you can get the feedback and then you can calibrate. Anyway, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that. Like where, yeah, we weren't gonna make a decision, but I hear that.
Sure.
Like, yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, are we tasting and just creating some sort of anxiety or tension, or
I did ask that question.
just for no reason and
I did
out
ask
of
that
context?
question. Yeah,
You know?
or in its own bubble.
Sure.
You
Which
know?
would be out of context
Yeah,
of the whole thing.
Out
is
of
how I'd
context of
say
what we're
it.
trying to do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I had so many great shots as well that I had a little reach out about that same thing. I was like, let's hold off on worrying so much about it right now and just see, because I'm having really good experiences and adjustments will happen in general. And then let's look at a bigger picture anyway, because we're going to have, no matter what with an organic product in specialty coffee, you're going to have some form of minor inconsistency. But what I would say in my barista competition is character in the coffee. It's like it's going to express itself a little differently throughout the process. And as we get better and better always at all of our QC systems, it'll consistently be very, very consistent. That was twice over. That was a redundancy. But we are already very, very consistent, especially coffee is, but you're still using organic product. We've talked about that. You're going to have weeks when it's not as amazing, or days, we'll say, not weeks, where it's just having a week where it's just, you're going to taste the edges of what the coffee is going to be like. That's just what it is. And it's not even going to be super noticeable for 99% of people, only for the people in here. So you can freak out about it, or you can say, like, are we moving in a great direction? And I think to my experience recently, what we've been doing is actually putting the coffee in a really good direction. I've been having really, really good coffee, really good espresso shots.
Same.
Across the board too, which is not, that to me is the best way of tasting it. It's at Aptos, it's downtown, it's at Portola, it's here, different baristas, quote unquote same water system, but we're not, like we're as close as we can get. And I'm getting really nice shots, specifically of the answer.
Sure.
And that's,
you're looking
that's
at how does it
coffee
perform in
top.
the real world across a wide
And that's
spectrum
been
of baristas.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been really, really, really good. And we have a coffee mission, right? Sweet, clean, lasting finish. That's what we're looking for. And what was in question, right, is occasionally you could taste some roast in the finish in the espresso. But I'm starting to have it actually be more the other direction, where it's like I'm tasting roast in the espresso way more often than I was, and that's, I think, where the conversation is going. And it's fun.
Roast is a tricky thing because everybody gets used to what they've always been drinking. You know, we taste off of, like I said before, we taste off of different references. So if you're used to a certain roast level and then you roast it longer, hotter, more development, any one of those things, you might taste what tastes quote unquote more roasty.
Right.
But it might not be roasty at all. It's just got a more pronounced roast on it compared to what you've been tasting before.
Yeah.
That was part of the conversation that Mark and I were having too. I was like, I taste more roast in this than what I've tasted in the past. Like if it's going to go, for the past 6 to 12 months, a long time actually.
Right.
But it's not roasty to me at all.
Yeah.
So that almost feels like a contradiction. I taste more roast, but it doesn't taste roasty.
Yeah, I don't think that, but yeah. I mean, if you're listening, this is an interesting thing to start tasting or looking to taste, is that you can have more roast in a coffee. And sometimes if you don't put that there, you'll also will be missing so much complexity, so much body, so much sweetness, so much nuance that I mean, I can just tell you that from experience. Like, you might be saying like this is old guard stuff and that there's a new way, and like
No, and
but it's-
nobody actually believes that, and let me tell you why.
yeah.
Because nobody doesn't roast their coffee. Because people will
Right.
pretend like coffee is perfect once we pick it and process it, and it's got all of these intrinsic flavors, and that's just there. And
Yeah.
if we're just trying to present that, and okay, cool, let's say we are trying to present that. Like, roasting is a part of that process.
Oh, it's so fun too.
It takes the flavor potential that any coffee has and develops it, and it opens it up,
Yeah.
and you get all these magical things because of it. You know, you could think of almost any kind of food that you would cook in the same way. It's like you take a steak and you, like, if you're going to smoke a tri-tip or put it on the grill or whatever, because like the Maillard reactions that happen and some sort of caramelization.
You definitely gotta get it right to break down fats in there, or else it's
right.
And it's different cuts.
You
too.
end up with something that is better than what you had before, and that's how I see the roast process. You're transforming a raw product. So sure, there is a point of diminishing return where you're literally just burning it and getting carbon. But if you're trying to get in a sweet spot where you've got some sort of caramelization, which I would call, sweetness that's imparted from the roast, mixing with the proper level of intrinsic sweetness, whatever's in the coffee, and you're bringing all that out, then you have this perfect balance. So when I say roast, it doesn't mean, I'm not saying ashy. I'm not saying carbon. I'm not saying
No smoke.
dirty. No smoke. Nothing like that.
No tobacco.
Yeah. And if I was going to compare what I was talking about just a couple minutes ago, old version of the coffee, new version of the coffee, I taste more roast in here without it being roasty. If I was going to zoom out, I don't think I would have said that what we had before was underdeveloped in its own, but now tasting this other version, I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't think we were taking some of these components far enough or in the right direction.
Totally.
Or going deep enough with it to get that sublime experience. There was just something left on the table.
Well, and here's, I think, there's two things that are coming to mind, but I think it might surprise people that the actual cleanliness on the palate, even though the coffee is roasted a little bit more, is up.
Yeah.
Like,
agreed.
Clearly up. And this might feel like a contradiction to a lot of people when you assume that more roast equals like less cleanliness and clarity of flavor. It's not necessarily true, and it's also how you roast the coffees. And even for reference, like out of the three coffees, two of them are, we would say, hotter and a little longer. One of them is actually far less developed in terms of percentage. So roasters do with that what you will. It went from like a 18% development, 19% development down to like a 14% development. So,
but it's longer and hotter.
Yeah, it's longer and not even that much hotter, but like
a little bit,
like a minute and a half longer.
Yeah,
and the curve's beautiful, and it's we'll call it, I think, only 2 degrees hotter than what was standing before, but significantly less development percentage. Anyways, all that to say, you might think to yourself that with more roast comes less cleanliness and clarity. That's not true. When you find the right level of roast to match the level of extraction you're doing in your recipe, like, you have to realize you're playing with all of these things. And that's something that we do here on site that we understand, and then to potentially try to take that product, right, and make it your own and play in your own way. Call it, we have a recipe, and you go out and make it a different recipe. You're going to experience something different. That doesn't make the coffee better or worse. It just means different. And so that's something to notice, is if we're not, like, we're making it in such a way that we're giving an expression and a through line all the way to the cup. And that's what we're looking at. So there's that. And I already lost my second train of thought, but it doesn't even matter. That was it. You can have coffee that's been roasted more developed and or less developed, hotter or longer, and whatever mix in that matrix, and you can create coffee that is far cleaner at a deeper roast, we'll say, than you might realize. And if you go the other way around, it's actually oftentimes not necessarily clean, and that hollow acidity is actually taking away from the cleanliness on the palate, and it's actually making it more harsh and more astringent. And you might be able to more clearly taste some of the nuance, but it still could be a detracting flavor experience across the board.
And I think with those super light roasted coffees, even though you think you could taste more of the nuance, for me, maybe you have one or two flavors that feel like they're really clear, but it's not complex. It's not, you're not getting the full spectrum of what you could be getting if you developed it properly.
Yeah. I think what was maybe a comparison for people, like everybody's roasted a marshmallow, right? And we've had this experience of roasting marshmallows. It's not the exact apples to apples at all, but if you like fully scorch the marshmallow, right? You catch it on fire, you blow it out, and then you eat that outside layer. You've got this like experience that I think it's delicious. But then if you get a perfectly roasted marshmallow, it's actually pretty hard to do for one, but it's fully properly Maillard. There's such an odd amount of complexity to something that is just white sugar and gelatin that you can get from like that perfect caramelized brown where it's bubbling. And I would say like that to me is a little bit of what you're talking about when it comes down to creating the roast in a way where it's nuanced and exciting. You can taste the same thing, right? White sugar and gelatin. And you've got all these levels. When you get to that perfect caramelized Maillard situation, you've got texture, you've got a real complexity of caramelized, like it tastes more like caramel, it tastes like sweet, it tastes like other stuff. It's a little molassesy. And then you can go really, really far to where you still have sweetness and you still have, but it's clearly burnt sugar. And I like burnt sugar, I like burnt caramel myself.
Well, it's
a
delicious.
lot. It's delicious. But if you're thinking about that in your coffee, you also have this thing that is, it's like a dyad. No, it's a dyad. There's two flavors. There's the outside, you pull off that skin, and then there's the inside, which is still completely, totally raw, and actually sometimes even still cold.
Right, you can get a perfect exterior and have a hard, tough interior marshmallow, or you can get a perfect exterior with a nice gooey interior.
Right.
There's like a million ways to do it. You can burn it without even, making the interior change at all. So
I mean, just picture that, potentially that idea in a cup. If you have something that gets ground up and the inside and the outside are all getting brewed at the same time, you could have yourself a pretty inconsistent cup of coffee. Because you could, like green coffee in the center and dark ass roasted coffee on the outside. And I know that's an exaggeration, is not what we want in any of our coffees. So that's where you get to play and roast. That's where the craft is there for you. Can you get the coffee roasted all the way through? And I remember when we were competing back in the day, and Pete Licata and all of us were hanging out, and it was something I learned from him. He would always crack open the coffee to see how it was roasted all the way through, and he'd try to look at the inside because we were tasting the coffee, and he was fresher. He came to like kind of sit in and watch Chris and I compete or practice and give feedback, and he helped me actually at the season I won. He kind of coached me, which was awesome. He did coach me, got me a cigar. It was rad. He had to leave before I got the win, but it was very sweet.
Pete.
All that to say though, he would pop it open and he'd look at it, and we'd be tasting, but he'd be evaluating, because at the time we didn't have as much crop stir or any of that stuff to kind of look at and the tools. And that was one thing. Is it roasted all the way through? Are we getting what we can out of this coffee? Stuff's interesting to me, dude.
Yeah, I want to double back on the coffee's an organic product thing and just kind of tie that off with a bow. Because what that doesn't mean is we have an excuse to just send whatever out into the world and be like inconsistent with it and wild with it and be like, deal with it. Because, we have partners and we want to provide them with a solid experience, and we don't want to give them any surprises. But
big time.
Anybody who has a flagship blend, parts are going to go in and out of that blend.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of coffee. So sometimes we're going to fill those slots with similar coffees, but it won't be the exact same lot, and that's just the facts of buying lots of coffee. And most of the time, we can switch things in and out, dial it in, and no one would ever know. Like, we can't even tell. Like, if I didn't know that, well, I don't know. I might be stretching the truth a little bit. Yeah.
We can tell, but it's not in the regard of, like, this is very different. It's just
99% of people
it's all
would be like,
nuance.
"Oh yeah, this is the same.
Yeah,
this
'cause
is
we
the
know our
same thing. We
product.
dialed it
Yeah.
in." But if we do have a big change, to where it's like, okay, we're changing the roast on this in a way to where you're going to taste something different, which I feel like this, what we're doing right now, is like it's noticeably different. It's better, but it's still noticeably different.
Yeah,
Like everyone should get a heads up on that one, where
Yeah.
it's communication from us to our partners. So hey,
we're trying some stuff. We're
we're tweaking the coffee to make it better,
Yep.
and in this way, you're gonna have this lot landing here. Here's how you can expect it to perform differently, or here's how you might want to do some tweaks. And then there's no surprises for anybody. Like everyone feels comfortable and confident doing what they need to
Absolutely.
do with it and pulling it and be like, oh yeah, totally been expecting it.
Yeah, we're in the loop.
Because you can taste the same thing. If we made tweaks to a roast, if we made tweaks to the answer and ran a split experiment, and half of our partners, we gave them a heads up, say like, hey, this is coming. It's really awesome. Here's
Right.
why we like it. Here's how like we suggest pulling it. Sent that out. I would be willing to bet that the overall response would be positive. If we took the other portion of the split test, just sent it out and didn't say anything, exact same coffee, people would probably be, something's wrong with the coffee.
Something's different, yeah.
Something's not even something's different.
Right,
Something's
it'd be
wrong.
wrong. It'd be wrong, 'cause
Because
they're
if they don't have the
expecting
primer and it's not what they thought it would be, they're gonna be like, this is a mistake. Like the fact that I haven't been communicated with or touched base with tells me that something is going on.
Yeah.
They're missing the mark on quality.
Hopefully they give feedback or at least ask about it, right? Which is good.
Hopefully.
That's what I said,
Hopefully.
yeah.
But it's on us to communicate ahead of time.
Always.
Right.
That's what the professionalism is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That professionalism. That's what we're talking about. So just I would feel uncomfortable saying something like coffee's an organic product. You just get what it is. It's like we still have a job to do to provide a consistent and awesome experience for our guests and our cafes and our partners.
All the intentionality.
Yeah, exactly.
No, what I mean is more like buy coffee from Ethiopia, and the hashtag, the washing station is from an area, and all the coffee gets delivered from that area, and it's hundreds of farmers sometimes. And that washing station could be called Guji, and that's what you're getting. Guji grade 1, 2, 3. And that's what I'm talking about when
Right.
it comes to organic. And
that lot
as
is
consistent
already
as
essentially a
possible.
blend of
that,
coffees.
yeah, and honestly, this is something that most large companies that are larger than us, and I think in some regard it's a fun idea for us to get this big, is they get to a place where they have to buy more coffee for said blends than they currently have. They can't get it, right. So we'll just, whatever, we'll say if I wanted to buy coffee from Santa Barbara Mountain in Honduras and for the answer, and I needed a shit ton of it, and I didn't have all my single origin farmer partners in the Best Friends Club, they couldn't provide it. What a lot of companies end up doing is they go and they cup the shit out of tables and tables and tables, and they find all the coffees that hit, call it 85 points, and have a generalized flavor profile like so. They buy all those lots and then have them blended together to make something that they can use for a period of time. And that is very normal, and also a complete necessity if you're trying to have a product that's relatively consistent. We have coffees coming off the mountain of Hunapu, and the reason it's called Hunapu is it goes to a washing station, and that's in Antigua, Guatemala, but it's a big volcano, Volcan de Agua, and on that volcano is a bunch of farmers that do Hunapu, and they're not all isolated in single farmer lots, right? They're all blended into an awesome coffee called Hunapu that's made it to competition level a bunch, and it's delicious. That's more what I'm talking about when you're talking organic product, is unless you have, which is honestly kind of a luxury, to have the micro lot ability, and somewhat, we'll call it whatever is just above micro lot, like a single farm and farmer coffee, like that's actually not as easy for the bigger companies to get anymore, and you're not going to see that as much, right? I mean, unless it's some farmer.
I don't think it's ever been the case that those micro lot, single farmer, really identifiable lots, whether it's based off of just one farm or one variety from one farm.
Yeah,
those have never been the staples in companies' biggest blends.
because
You
it's
know
not,
what I mean?
It's not
Just,
available.
it's just a different program.
Right.
It's not available, and it's not. What do you call it? It doesn't make sense monetarily.
Right. I mean, those
Because
two go
most
hand
of
in
those
hand to me.
coffees, once you start splitting them out, you're looking at things and you're paying a premium for it. So I'm sure it's really hard for Intelligentsia to blend their best coffees into Black Cat,
Right.
which is going out for espresso and drip, even when they're in their heyday of, leading, because at some point they were leading the third wave movement, essentially,
time.
or one of the big time players.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd
So
call
even
them leading
during
it.
those days, like when they were more of a boutique company, I mean, there's no way they're putting those things in. It's like, I'm sure Hairbender never had those coffees in it, that
Totally.
single origin,
Or at least not in any large
not in any
regard.
meaningful way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's kind of the point. And I think it's okay for us to all look at this honestly as an industry. Like, I mean, one, there's probably a reason you're not seeing consistently El Salvador or Panama, most likely Costa Rica, like most of the Central American coffees, you're probably not seeing them consistently in large blends because they're just not as available as places like Brazil and Ethiopia and Colombia are just like the big timers in specialty, maybe Mexico, maybe some of these other places as well, because literally production is that level, like maybe Yemen, maybe, whatever, Kenya potentially, although Kenyan coffees are more expensive, so you're not seeing that as much. And that's totally okay. Like, that's just, it is part of it. Like, what are you going to do? And then I think the strategy for places, and I am making this up based on how I think about it, but if you have a blend like Hairbender that was, known to be something from every region, 6 to 8 beans, then you have an opportunity to create something that you've already gone out, to your point earlier, and said, this is what it'll be, 6 to 8 coffees. Therefore, it's going to have a generalized flavor like this, but it's going to be pretty complex, and it's not going to be the same exact experience every time. And that's also okay for us. It allows you to play, I think, with a lot of bases, and then, then you can funnel in some fun single origins here and there, but they don't have to be hyper consistent. And we've moved to a place where, like, what we want to do is way more consistent. And you're hearing a little bit of the strategies you'd have to impose, right, in order to do that. You either go with the 8 beans, 6 to 8 beans, and go wild in some regard. And I know that's too nonchalant. They're not going just wild. They're very caring. Let's be real. And then you can go our route, which is 2 to 3 coffees, and then you have to be far more intentional. And more intentional is unfair to say. You have to be very intentional, and you have to be very specific in what you're putting in there, because you have made a promise as to what the experience will kind of be like just by saying 2 coffees, right? 2 coffees means far more distinguishable than maybe 6 to 8 coffees. At least in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't have a problem with either, by
Yeah.
the way. I actually loved and still love the idea of Hairbender. I think it's smart and wise and fun. I have great shots of it.
I haven't had a shot of Hairbender in so long.
I had one.
What do you think the fate of all those companies are? Because I think about this a lot, and it might sound like I'm talking trash, so I'll just get that out of the way. I'll just get that out of the way. But there's these companies who were undeniably leaders in the industry that we participate in. So there's Intelligentsia, there's Stumptown. I mean, the 2 of those alone, Stumptown, I can't remember what opened first. Like maybe Intelli was 97, Stumptown was maybe 99, early 2000s. And they both have these prolific individuals at the helm, and then also backed up by people who really developed the green buying movement. I mean, we talked to Aleko a couple weeks ago. He was here.
Jeff Watts has been
he
here
was
not
the
too
green
long
buyer
ago.
for Stumptown for a long time. Jeff Watts, legend in the green buying community, was at Intelligentsia when they were getting all those things going. These people essentially created the industry,
the whole thing that we used. Yeah.
And now there are these brands that still exist. They don't feel like they're incredibly founder or owner driven, and they just kind of are. And they have undeniably a big market share. People know the companies. They have a sizable retail presence. but I kind of think of them as dead brands. And I don't mean that in a way of they're not profitable or making money, but they're certainly not
Well, they're just
driving
not, yeah.
trends or contributing to a certain culture in any meaningful way. And I can't tell if that's just because of, if there's some tension in my mind because of how I thought of them before, or is being that leader, is it even necessary? Like, is this just a sustainable business that will continue to run for X amount of time until they maybe roll it all into one mega chain? Like, what's going to happen with those brands?
That is a good question. Well, what's my experience been recently? I mean, we were in Chicago for SCA. I went to the Millennium Park in Telly, which was awesome. The coffee was awesome. The service was awesome. If I didn't know it was now, whatever, a bigger brand and that it had been bought, and I walked in based on its location, right? I would have been like, I'm trying to be like open-minded in terms of what it felt like. Hella busy spot to be, like, but also downtown. So I mean, in that regard, like,
yeah, so it's a pop-in cafe that's contributing to the community that's in, making people happy.
Legit specialty coffee.
And had good coffee.
And it for sure, like, yeah, and it would have been, like, clearly specialty coffee. They had a single origin offering. Like, it still was living the culture in that regard. And then you are right. They are not culturally as impactful since relatively, early on after the transition, where all the people who are kind of the voices and the pushers of culture in some regard use their voices the same way, right? It changed in that.
I mean, to be completely fair, arguably no one is.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that.
Back in the day, you had a few people who were essentially driving the train for the entire industry, and that just doesn't exist anymore because you've got all these little pockets of culture and people interacting with smaller and smaller bits of culture.
That part's cool.
Which is it's really interesting. So I'm just trying to I'm more I think I think about it all the time because what is this going to be like in 10 years? I
mean, that's kind of where I was going, though, is you have to continue to play in the industry or play at evolution or play at growth in some regard that is meaningful, or else you are that. Like, I'd say at this point, their contribution is paving a road. And then if things go well, besides all the potential people who either got paid out in it being purchased and maybe in a perfect world, some other cool things, you are potentially getting more specialty coffee into more places if they do a good job, as the big business with the money. It like can continue to elevate the idea of what quality is and almost like sneak it in, right? In that subconscious way where it's like, well, if there's more Intellis everywhere and more stump towns serving coffee, at least at that level that I experienced in Millennium Park, then more people are wanting quality at the base level, right? Like, that's the idea of Australia that we loved, is everybody expects a level that's quite a bit higher as a base level than the States. And that to me is the win there. So
if Intelligentsia or Stumptown became the new Pizza or Starbucks, that's awesome. Better for everybody, I think, because the level of coffee is just raised overall.
And if that's it. Like,
and
if
that's
it's not cultural,
that's its own
it's
contribution.
Anything,
well, it is cultural. It's just a different. Right,
but if it's not like cultural in the way where it's like human beings inspiring in that regard, it's just specifically like this product changed the game and the way we serve it changed the game. That is cultural. That's a cultural plus for me.
Yeah, that's a fair hypothesis that maybe those brands are just going to continue to be kind of the quote unquote normal coffee experience. I think that's kind of where I see Blue Bottle heading.
Right.
They're slowly creeping up, and in certain markets in 10, 20, 30 years, they will be essentially like a much higher quality version of Pete's.
Yeah, it seems like it.
what Pete's was when Pete's was in its heyday,
Mm-hmm.
where this is where you go if you know about coffee and you care about getting fresh coffee from people who give a shit.
Yeah.
Like, it seems to be maybe the next wave of that. Like, that's the game that they're playing at.
I mean, and that's all hope, right? I mean, you ask those questions of yourself, and we think about it too. But it isn't really hate at all. You're just wondering, like, does a buyout like that, or an expansion, or a growth, does it affect the other side? Does it become nothing? And I don't think it inherently does either or. I think it really comes down to what the company decides to do in terms of participation, and for lack of a better term, it makes it too black and white. But the idea of marketing meaning though communication externally. What do you as a company talk about? Who are you talking to? Where are you putting that information? And I think that to me is where it all makes sense, or doesn't, for having an impact. And we're going to have a way we want to do that. And I think you can endlessly do that, like we could always market to home baristas and roasters like a Sweet Maria's idea. And everybody knows Sweet Maria's. At least when I hear them, like, where do you get coffee? Sweet Maria's or whatever it is, so I think that all comes down to intentionality. Where do you want to be talked about? Where do you want to be heard? Where do you want to play? Is it worth it? And that's truly owner-founder driven or strategy driven. And we're sitting at a place where it's like those places used to be one way and now they're not that way anymore. And it's a good question. I would love to sit in on, like, is there any, or what level of the ladder does the strategy come into play, where it comes down to concepts like that versus we're just looking at P&Ls and you're at this super high place where shareholders need this much return on their investment, and we're doing this, that, and the other, and here's what we need to do. Like, you get to big business like that, and I'm sure you have those layers.
Yeah, in terms of what is prompting those people to sell in the first place.
No, like when you get to big
grow
business,
super rapidly.
What is it? Where
what's
are
the
there
motivation
people,
from?
Are there people somewhere, like, just a few steps down from the money spending? You can use this X in your budget. Are there people just down the way where, like, I want to do engagement here and there and the other, and it's just like, it's just not what we're gonna do because, or maybe they are. Like, that's where I wonder. Where is that? I don't know in companies that big where people sit in terms of talking about actually strategy and cultural strategy and business strategy. And I'd love to sit and just listen to whoever those people are. And I don't know. Does it even come from the top at all? Probably not. Does it come from a board? Probably not. I don't know. It's unfair of me to say. Those are just questions I ask myself. Where does it happen?
I'm not quite following. Let me. So you're wondering who's creating the strategy for those companies? Like, does it come from the board or the owner or both or neither? Is that what you're saying?
I'm wondering what portion of strategy and conversation happens, right? You picture, this is why I'm projecting. You picture some sort of C-suite of, if it's Blue Bottle, we'll say, like, whoever are the tops of whatever. You've got the CEO of Blue Bottle, we'll say.
Right.
Who probably sits with a board.
Right.
And answers to some board of Nestle and people.
Sure.
Right? And they're sitting there. I imagine they're not talking very deeply about yearly strategy beyond, like, numbers and maybe some, like, very broad initiatives. So I'm wondering, like, how far, quote unquote, down do you get before people start talking about the strategy in the way that we talk about it, you and I, a lot?
What specific strategies are you talking about? Like,
it could be endless. That could be, like, the marketing strategy of who they want to talk to, and like, or other people that are really passionate about certain levels of coffee and green buying. Like, there's things I literally don't know. I wonder if there is that anymore, or where it sits. If people are fighting for it and they can't get it because of budget. If they're like, they're making, not excuses. They're having to make compromises here, there, and the other because they have X amount of budget to spend on all this different shit. And it's like, like, do you have all these people who are passionate in these different areas doing their best, or has it completely changed to where it's like, we are a metrics-based business that has a formula? And I don't believe it's either or. I wonder. That's where I'm asking. It's such an open-ended, like, I'd love to sit, the fly on the wall in those different levels of meeting just to see where and who would talk about what.
Yeah, that'd be pretty fun.
That's where I'm going. Like, I truly don't know, and that's why it feels ethereal. I'm breaking down what sounds like a potential chain of command in my mind, and I have no clue how that works.
Yeah, I would love to sit in on the meetings that were happening when the individuals who started the company decided to take on investment money or sell the company. I'm like really curious to understand what those motivations are and what that feels like.
Yeah.
And I don't care either way in terms of I think it's cool to sell or lame to sell or like punk rock, keep it all. I'm just like, I just am really curious. How did that start? Like, how do you go from being Dwayne, who starts one of the most epic coffee companies of all time, to eventually just selling that company? Like, that's really interesting to me. How does that work? What does that feel like?
Dwayne, you're friends with us. Come jump on
and
the
why?
podcast.
Yeah,
Let's
no,
talk
it's
about
like, yeah, I should talk. I have all these. It's not that I don't know any of these people. You know what
totally
I mean?
know 'em.
It's like we could talk to Dwayne. We could talk to James Freeman for sure. And it'd be really interesting to talk to Zell as well.
Douglas, yeah.
All these people. I just maybe I should.
That'd be
I
fun.
hesitate to reach out because I don't know.
I mean, they just say no.
I know. I just feel like maybe I would only want to talk to someone if they wanted to be really, really open and honest.
Right.
And I always feel like there's things that certain people don't want to talk about.
We
And that's
could
my
pregame
projection.
that.
You know
well,
what I mean?
you're probably not wrong, but we could always pregame it and just be like, what's on or off the table? Is this even going to work for
Even in
everybody?
private, I'd love to talk to somebody in private and just keep it there and just kind of understand what helped them make those decisions or what led them to that.
Yeah, man, that's a great. It's going to be different for everyone too, right? You know,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
you could have your mom and pops, for lack of a better term, or your people who made it to 5-6 stores and they're just like, they want to either pass it on to somebody else or who maybe works for them or just wants to get out and start looking at different things and it's their retirement, you know, and then they've created something profitable that's sellable, and that's one thing. Not how I look at it for us, but I could see people being there and just being like, yeah, we're just kind of like want to do other stuff now.
Yeah.
You know, because everybody does evolve in their life and they have things that they end up wanting to do and being interested in different things altogether. And sometimes you want a full career shift or you just want to be able to not have to think about something. And sometimes that means sell it. Sometimes it also means like sell most of it. And then
I can relate to that for
yeah,
sure.
like everybody has things, but I mean, you get these, we're talking about companies of size that are quite a bit larger when you're speaking like that. And it's quite a bit bigger payout.
Well, yeah, people always ask, are you guys going to sell? I'm like, look, dude, we don't even have to think about that shit.
Let's not even.
Turns out no one's knocking at the door anyway. People ask it like it's this thing that happens. Like people are just going around.
We've had some fake
buying
knocks
coffee
for sure.
companies.
Yeah,
like,
I'm like, no, dude.
You just want to buy this. Anyway.
Is your equity up for grabs?
Is your equity
no,
up for
it's down
grabs?
for keeps.
Sorry, dude.
Down for keeps.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, let us know, or tell a friend. These are the types of connections that are the most important to us and that we seek to create every day. If there's something you heard and you want to know more about, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com or head to our website, catandcloud.com/podcast, and let us know. While you're on our site, check out everything we have to offer. Dive deep into one of our single origin coffees or pick up a little treat for yourself. We have something for everyone, so check it out. Also, find us in the usual places, YouTube, Instagram. We're always there sharing amazing things. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for being awesome. We'll be back next week.